John Gill, Revelation chapter 6, verse 12. Scripture quote, "And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal," unquote. John Gill quote, "Of the sealed book which the Lamb took out of the hand of him that sat upon the throne, in order to open it and unloose its seals. About this seal, interpreters much differ. Some refer this to the destruction of Jerusalem, because the likeness of expressions were used, and in Matthew chapter 24, verse 7, reading from the King James Bible, quote, "The nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in divers places," unquote. But this was past many years before the seal was opened, and besides, though that time was a day of wrath to the uttermost unto the Jewish people, and it was the Lord's day of wrath, taking vengeance on them for their unbelief and rejection of him as the Messiah. Yet they had no sense of the Lamb, nor any apprehensions of his wrath at that time, nor have they now, but imputed their calamity to their divisions and quarrels among themselves. Others think this seal belongs to the destruction of the Roman Empire by the Goths, Huns, Vandals, etc. But it should be observed that the empire stood some hundreds of years after the end of the fifth seal and the opening of this, and it was after the seventh seal and at the sounding of the trumpets that the destruction came on. Moreover, that calamity was by the savageness of some barbarous nations which overrun the empire. But this here spoken of comes from the wrath of the Lamb. Add to which that calamity distressed the Christians in the empire, and them chiefly, whereas this falls only upon the enemies of the Lamb and the persecutors of his people. Others are of the opinion that this has respect to the strange change of affairs in the Church of Christ through the rise, power, and tyranny of Antichrist. By, quote, "the earthquake," unquote, they suppose is meaning the shaking of both church and state by the man of sin, who shook the doctrines, ordinances, and discipline of the church, and threw all this into confusion, and introduced a new face of things, and also shook the kingdoms of the earth, and the thrones and crowns of princes, by the sun becoming black. They think is meant the Son of Righteousness, Jesus Christ, who was obscured in the doctrines concerning him as the one and only mediator, and justification by his righteousness and pardon through his blood, by introducing the mediations of angels and saints, the doctrines of justification by works and doctrines of merit, works of supererogation, indulgences, pardons, penance, and purgatory. By the moon, they understand the church, which receives all its light, grace, righteousness, and holiness from Christ, and which, like the moon, is changeable as to its outward form and circumstances, and this became as blood, through the persecution, massacres, and cruelties of the Romish Antichrist, who has been made drunk with the blood of the saints and martyrs of Jesus. The stars they take to be the ministers of the word, either hypocritical ones who were like unripe figs, destitute of true grace, and so were easily shaken with the wind of papal power, and fell into the earth and apostatized from the faith and conformed to the corruptions of Antichrist, or the true ministers of the gospel, who were put to death, and that to an untimely and violent one, signified by the shaking of the untimely figs by a mighty wind, by the heaven departing as a scroll rolled up, they supposed is designed either the church which fled into the wilderness and remained invisible during the papal power and cruelty, or else the scriptures, which the Pope made himself sole judge and interpreter of, and shut up from the common people in an unknown language, and forbid the laity the reading of them. By mountains, they think, are intended the kings and the princes of the earth, who are obliged to submit to the Romish Antichrist, and give their kingdoms to him, and receive their crowns and kingdoms from him, and be his vessels. And by the islands, the people, their subjects, who were forced to acknowledge him as the supreme head, and receive his mark in their right hand or forehead, or they could not buy and sell. And by all ranks and decrees of men as kings, etc. hiding themselves in rocks and mountains and calling upon them to fall on them and cover them. They apply either to their invoking the Virgin Mary and other saints to intercede for them and screen them from the wrath of God and Christ on account of their sins, or else to the persecutors of the saints of every rank and every age, and to their punishments that shall fall upon them. But, however feasible this interpretation may seem to be, it is certain that this was not the face of things at the close of the fifth seal, or the Diocletian persecution, and at the opening of the sixth, which Constantine came to the imperial throne. For then the church appeared as she is described in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." Unquote. Which is just the reverse of this. There are others who, because of the very awful things here spoken of, and the very awful language in which they are expressed, conclude that this seal represents the day of judgment, not considering that the fifth seal ends about the year 313, at the close of the last of the 10 persecutions, and that the sixth seal begins where that ends, and though above 1750 years have elapsed since that time, yet the day of judgment is not come, and we know not when it will. Besides, here is another seal, a seventh seal, which follows and introduces punishments on the Roman Empire, and 7 vessels which follow pour out plagues upon Antichrist, all which can never be thought to be the day of judgment. Moreover, the account of the day of judgment stands in its proper place in Revelation chapter 20, verse 12, after the destruction of Babylon, the first resurrection, and the saints' 1,000-year reign with Christ. But to proceed, the business which is the subject of the seal is the removing of paganism and pagan governors out of the Roman Empire. This was the thing the rider upon the white horse under the first seal set out upon to effect, and never ceased until he had accomplished it. And this is what ensued upon the close of the fifth seal, when pagan persecution ceased on Constantine, a Christian empire having the reign of power in its hands. And it cannot be thought, though, that so wonderful a change of things as this should be omitted in this prophetic history, and it is easy to observe that changes in kingdoms and governments, both as to the policy and religion of them, are sometimes expressed in such like figurative terms as here. See Isaiah chapter 13, verse 9. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it," unquote. And which may be accommodated to this event as follows, unquote. Scripture, quote, "And lo, there was a great earthquake," unquote. John Gill, quote, "or shaking both of the heavens and earth," in which it denotes in Haggai chapter 2, verse 6. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, yet once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land," unquote. Compared with Hebrews chapter 12, verse 26. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, "Whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven," unquote. The removing of Jewish worship and ordinances in order to make way for the Christian ordinances and institutions which were to remain. So here it intends the removing of pagan worship and idolatry and of pagan ministries, that the Christian religion and Christian magistrates might take place. This, with what follows concerning the darkness of the sun and moon, might be literally true, and it seems by historians that there were such phenomena about those times, for it is asserted that a very great earthquake in Syria followed the Diocletian persecution, which shook and caused to fall the tops of houses at Tyre and Sidon, and killed many thousands, and some such like happened at Rome, and at Spoletum, where above 350 pagans perished as they were serving their idols. It is also observed that the moon was turned into blood in the times of Galerius, that's Galerius, who succeeded Diocletian, and the sun failed and the stars shined for 4 hours. When Licinius, that's Licinius, was conquered by Constantine, but then these may be considered as symbols of the change in the empire, unquote. Scripture quote, and the sun came black as sackcloth of hair, unquote. John Gill quote, which is made of black hair. See Isaiah chapter 50, verse 3. Reading from the King James Bible, quote, I clothe the heavens with blackness, and I make sackcloth their coverings, unquote. As when eclipsed, the sun was the chief deity worshipped by the heathens under various names, and this becoming black may design the removing of their principal gods from their honor and glory, or the downfall of idolatry, which the Jews called the son of idolatry, which they suppose is meant in Songs of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 6, reading from the King James Bible, quote, look not upon me, because I am black, because the sun hath looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept, unquote. And Satan, the god of this world, who was worshipped in different form, now fell, as Lucifer, the son of the morning, and as lightning from heaven, and was cast down from all dignity, influence, and power to the earth, for the casting out of the red dragon, the old serpent, and Satan, after his combat with Michael and his angels, in Revelation chapter 12, verse 3, reading from the King James Bible, quote, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads, unquote. Refers to this very time. Likewise, the chief magistrate, the heathen Roman emperor, may be included, and it is remarkable that Diocletian the emperor, who had now retired from the imperial government, and was under a cloud, under disgrace, and in distress, had in the zenith of his glory caused himself to be worshipped as a god, and as the brother of the sun and moon, unquote. Scripture quote, and the moon became as blood, unquote. John Gill quote, as when obscured, the Alexandrian copy and some others, the Capodian edition, the Vulgate Latin, and all the Oriental versions read, quote, the whole moon, unquote. This may design the next heathen deity or class of deities, for the moon was also worshipped by the heathens under different names, and may likewise include the pagan priesthood, which was next, and was annexed to the imperial dignity, and which was disused by Constantine and his successors, and even the very title and the robe which was a symbol of it were laid aside as unworthy of Christian princes. See Mede, that's Mede, upon the place. End of John Gill's Revelation chapter 6, verse 12. Footnote from the reader. Some of you have mentioned that I have a slur. I do. I had a stroke in October 2020, and I lost the ability to speak. And I did notice last night that it is true. I do have a slur from that stroke. I apologize if you find it to be a bother, but since nobody else is reading John Gill's exposition of the entire Bible, verse by verse, for the blind and those who cannot read, and those who are aged, and those that need this done, I'm it. And I'm called by God to do it till He calls me otherwise. This is Dr. Peter John. Thank you, and God bless.